Did you ever wonder why a chronograph is called a chronograph? The name is actually derived from two Greek words, chronos and graphos, meaning time writer. So we see chronographs all the time, but we don't see true chronographs that actually write the time, like this inking chronograph I have with me today. So it's a collectability first. I'm going to explain the history of the inking chronograph, and then we're going to take a look and see if we can actually get this inking chronograph to work. So let's go back and have a little bit of a history lesson. In the early 19th century, this is when the chronograph story began. Initially, and scholars generally agree that Louis Monnier was the first inventor of the chronograph. And he did this for astronomical purposes. And it was 1816, and it was an absolutely impressive clock that measured elapsed time. And a chronograph indeed measures elapsed time, and that's how this technology was evolved to solve this problem. How can you time events, and sometimes time events simultaneously? And it wasn't until 1821 when Nicolas-Mathieu Rieussec really popularized the idea of a chronograph for horse racing in particular, because all of these gentlemen, mostly gentlemen that were gambling, wanted to have the ability to time their horses, and he came up with this very novel clock that used dots and ink to actually indicate the start and stop times of the horses. But it wasn't until a few years later when this Frenchman, Frédéric Louis Faton, who's a star student of Abraham Louis Breguet, was the first one to truly popularize the chronograph. And this is what led to, we'll call it a fad. It was a small fad of inking chronographs throughout the 19th century. And Patek Philippe was also part of this and made an inking chronograph in very limited numbers, which was meant to be a luxury object. It's said, according to the Patek Philippe museum book, that less than 98 examples were made. And today we only know of 24 that actually still exist. And it was two periods of time that they were made. First, 1878 to 1880, and then later from 1891 to 1892. And during these two short periods, these inking chronographs were made and marketed by Patek Philippe. And here we have one of those 24 known examples before us. And it is an absolutely beautiful piece. You would think it looks like a pocket watch, but it's actually not a watch. This is just a chronograph. It's a timer for elapsed time. And you can see this massive silver case. And when you open it up to see the movement, it has this a gilt movement, which was a caliber that was made by Ambroise Duret and Piguet. And if you happen to have a copy of the Patek Philippe book, you can see here one of the inking chronographs that's in the museum to this day. And it's wonderful, so you can see what the actual caliber looks like. And the catalog description is quite detailed in showing all of the movement numbers of the inking chronographs that are known and all of the technical details of the piece. Now that I have one here in front of me, and it's the first time I've ever had one of these in my hands, it gives us the opportunity here at Collectability to do something for the first time, and that's to see if we can get an inking chronograph to work. So bear with me as I set up, and we're going to put some ink in the reservoir and see what happens when this Patek Philippe inking chronograph comes back to life. So the tools of this little experiment: I have some Collectability blue ink. Next, I have a very 19th century style quill pen. And I have a lot of hope because I don't know if this is going to work. So we're going to give it a try and see what happens, and hopefully we don't make a giant mess in the process. All right, so here we go. So the inking chronographs work like this. You would open up the bezel to see the dial. And the idea is once you start measuring an elapsed time, you would push this button here to start, stop, and reset. This button up here above the crown, you press, and that's what takes this, the central hand and dips it towards the dial and leaves and deposits a tiny dot of ink to measure whether it's starting or stopping. of that particular elapsed event. And that is absolutely intriguing. So I'm going to try it without ink first and see what happens. So first I press start. And now stop. Simple. So in theory, when I press this button here down, the hands will depress and drop and deposit just a little bit of ink on the dial so that you'll know that's the stop time of that event. And even when I press it now with no ink, you'll see how it almost just drops. It's almost 1/10 of a millimeter. And I want to know if that actually will work when we put ink in the reservoir. And if you look extremely close, the reservoir is just the tip of that hand, and it's a tiny little cup with a hole in it. So I'll use a loop as an example. It looks like this, and I have to deposit the ink in that tiny little hole. And when you press the button at the crown, it drops and puts that tiny dot on the dial. And what's so cool about this is then you have to take a cloth and wipe the dial after the ink is on it, so you can go measure another event. So I'm just picturing a bunch of people at a horse race with their inking chronographs, more focused on their chronographs than the horses themselves. All right, here we go. So we did a little of experiment of what the best way to get ink in the reservoir is. And we found this quill pen is the way to go. So first I dip this in. And for those of you who have never used a true pen and ink, they're so much fun. I was playing with this before. It's a really cool technology from the ancient world. So leave your Bics at home and go get a quill and pen. So my hands are shaking a bit because the reservoir is so small. And while I'm doing this, I'm thinking, how on earth did people do this originally and think it was a good idea? And I wonder if it was just the novelty value more than a functional value. Because if you're the one person at the horse race with the latest technology, you're the guy. All right, the reservoir is now full. And now I'm going to press start. And look at that. We have ink everywhere drawing a line. I'm not sure that's what should happen because it's just drawing a line of ink. But the concept is you press it down and it makes a dot. But now I put too much ink and there's like a line of blue that's going around the circumference of the dial. It actually looks quite cool. The concept is proven that you press the button, it drops the ink, and you have just marked the elapsed time. Now I hope that was as much fun for you as it was for me, because now I have to go wipe all the ink off of that dial. But I just want to wrap up this video by saying the history of chronographs is actually quite fascinating, and it goes back deep into the 19th century with these inkographs or inking chronographs. And now that you can see what they actually did, the next time you say the word chronograph, you're going to think of time writer. And I'm happy to say that this inking chronograph is available on collectability.com. And it's almost a little bit of the Patek Philippe Museum that you could have in your collection. And you too can try putting ink in the reservoir in the privacy of your own home. And I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you liked it, please like and subscribe on Collectability, YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. And until next time, please remember to enjoy the hunt.